Hello and welcome to Retro Reviews, my channel where I review my favorite retro video games of all time, as well as some modern releases I've recently finished. First and foremost, I want to say thank you so much for 100 subscribers. For everybody that's engaged in the comments and subscribed and liked the videos and watched, I really appreciate it. It means so much to me that people actually want to watch what I have to say. Thank you so much for engaging with the content, and I hope to see the channel continue to grow. Today I want to talk about a retro video game, Resident Evil 5. Now, I love the Resident Evil franchise. I have played every single mainline entry, but only as of recently, because I missed Resident Evil 5 and 6 way back in the day. I started playing through 6 forever ago, and I got it with my PlayStation 4. I got a secondhand PlayStation 4, and it came with it, and I just could not get into it. It took me a long time to finally come back and actually play the game. But Resident Evil 5 I missed entirely. By the time it came out, I was just purchasing my PlayStation 3. I got one secondhand with a bunch of games. I was 14 or 15 at the time. I didn't have money to be buying Resident Evil 5, so it just kind of passed by. I saw the gaming outlets giving it great reviews, especially like IGN gave it a 9, and it was fantastic. A great follow-up to Resident Evil 4 and the conclusion of Albert Wesker's story and seeing him as the main villain. So I was really interested and I really wanted to play it. But two things were eluding me at the time. I didn't have the funds, and I also wasn't sure if I wanted to rope my friend into playing the game with me, because I'd heard that the AI companion, if you're playing solo, Sheva, was not very good. Unless you're playing as a co-op. So I'm like, I don't know if I can really get somebody to play a full campaign with me. So I just kind of skipped it. But finally, the triple pack came, and it was cheap on Switch not too long ago. And I wanted to play Resident Evil 4 before the remake came out. So I bought it. I replayed Resident Evil 4 on my Switch, and then decided I was going to play Resident Evil 5 and 6 as well. And I was very excited. I was like, you know what? I'll ignore the bad things. I know what to expect. I have some strategies going into the game, playing solo, and I'll be able to figure out a way around Sheva. So let's talk first and foremost about what I like about Resident Evil 5. Because I know I posed the question in the title, is Resident Evil 5 a good game? And first and foremost, it follows right after Resident Evil 4, so it has the same kind of action plan that Resident Evil 4 had. So if you like the combat in Resident Evil 4, you're going to like it here. It plays remarkably similar, and they don't really introduce too much new. It's actually fantastic. So gameplay-wise, it really works. It plays exactly like Resident Evil 4. You have lots of weapons, lots of options. It's great. I really like Sheva as a character. I think she's really cool. She's a great companion to Chris Redfield, who you're playing as for the first time in a very long time since Resident Evil, the original, who is looking for Jill Valentine, his partner, who has gone missing, and up to this point, he hasn't known if she's dead or alive. Finally gets some information and goes to Africa to go and try and find her, and all this craziness happens, and the Las Plagas virus makes a return, which I really love from Resident Evil 4. So you have a new setting in Africa, which is also a fantastic setting. You have the Las Plagas virus making a return, which I think is the best way to do zombies in the franchise. I like the originals, what they did with it, but I think the Las Plagas making them still human, but a little bit like crazy, mind control, I think that's a good angle to go with. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I like the lore. I think the story is pretty decent. I know none of the Resident Evil games have like groundbreaking stories, but they're like B horror films. They're a little bit schlocky and campy, but really fun and scary at the same time. Resident Evil 5 has a pretty good story. And again, the conclusion with Albert Wesker. He is the main villain for a very long time, and you finally get to engage with him and fight him. He has several sequences, several different boss fights that you'll go up against him. He is a very formidable foe and a very terrifying presence. I like what they did with the voice acting. I think it's pretty good throughout. And yeah, it's a pretty decent experience for all of those things. But let's talk about what makes Resident Evil 5 not as good. Because I remember I said previously the gaming outlets gave it great reviews when it launched, so I must have something really fantastic. But there were so many things that I did not enjoy about this game. First and foremost, the inventory system. Resident Evil 4 had a phenomenal inventory system. Inventory management was actually fun in that game. You have the merchant for upgrading your weapons and selling things, selling all your treasures and such. I loved that system so much. I talked about it in my Resident Evil 4 review. But Resident Evil 5 kind of goes away from this entirely. There's no merchant. You will, at the end of like chapters, you'll sell things and upgrade your weapons there just on a menu. You have to manage 2 inventories at once, Sheva and Chris at the same time. And Sheva will automatically use like healing items if she gets them. Like if you get hit even a little bit, she'll automatically use it, which is exceptionally annoying. So you have to keep healing items away from her and keep them focused on Chris. You have to make sure she has enough weaponry and firepower, otherwise she's going to get overwhelmed. There are sections where you split up and she goes off by herself, and it's insanely infuriating if you haven't set her up to be strong and give her the weapons and ammunition she needs. And then you have to do suppressing fire and make sure she survives. The AI is pretty stupid, I will say, playing through this game. Sometimes it's pretty good. Sometimes she'll walk right in front of you and you accidentally shoot her. Sometimes she does a section where you send her off by herself and she'll go straight to her objective. Sometimes she'll sit and fire at enemies and miss them entirely for a solid minute and then get overwhelmed and die. It's pretty awful. You have to really make a good game plan going into playing this solo if you want to have any kind of enjoyable time. The enemies are pretty good AI-wise. There are lots of times where you'll have big mobs of enemies coming at you at once, but the problem is because Sheva is not a good AI companion, it makes it difficult to fight, and usually devolves into like shoot a few times and then run away and then reposition, shoot a few times, run away, and it's kind of a samey gameplay loop after a while, and it doesn't improve as time goes on. You just get big mountains of enemies, especially on these harder difficulties. I really like playing Resident Evil games on harder difficulties because it's usually a more challenging and more fun option, but in Resident Evil 5 it just turns them into like bullet sponges that are really not enjoyable to fight. It doesn't do anything interesting with raising the difficulty, and that's a big shame. I remember playing through and thinking, wow, some of these sections just suck because I should be taking these guys down, but it takes way too long, and again, Sheva isn't reliable as a companion, so it's not fun to do. Like getting back down to like lower difficulties is almost essential if you're playing this by yourself. I would not recommend higher difficulties at all. It's just not worth it. So the inventory system is not very fun. The gameplay loop that you're doing when fighting enemies at the beginning is pretty interesting. It can be for a while, but a lot of times it devolves into run and shoot, and then run and shoot and run and shoot, and repositioning yourselves in like spots where you can cheese out enemies and stuff like that. You find these cheese strats instead of actually playing the game. The other big criticism I have of this game is they really took out any kind of tension in the game because there's no real horror in this game at all. None at all. They really dialed up the action so much. They made it even more action heavy than Resident Evil 4. Resident Evil 4 succeeded because they dialed up the action, but they also dialed up the horror to go along with it. So it was scarier, but you had more firepower to deal with the horror. It was like increasing both at the same time, really dialed up both aspects. And I loved what they did with that. This, they dialed up the action and turned off the horror entirely. There's so many cool action set pieces that have no good payoff because nothing was scary in the first place. You don't feel satisfied beating anything in this game. It's just not very fun to finish something. Finishing a chapter has no good payoff because it was just kind of boring slogging through it. And then the next chapter is no better at all. The enemies are kind of interesting. I think there are a lot of varieties. There's some animal enemies as well. You go through some water areas, you go on a boat and you'll get into like shallow water. There's like little alligator, crocodile areas. Really cool idea, but they're not utilized nearly enough. The cool enemy varieties will pop up for a little bit and then they're gone, or they become too much and then they're too boring. They don't really capitalize on what makes their enemy varietals so nice. They also don't do anything special with boss fights. Most boss fights devolve into like a turret section, and I hate turret sections in video games. This was kind of indicative of the era too. Resident Evil 5 has a bland color palette, more like Call of Duty and Gears of War, has turret sections because that was really big at the time. All these action sequences that just don't have great payoff. It's just not very fun. Again, and that's the biggest problem I had, is it's not fun to do. The boss fights were not fun at all. In fact, some of them, again, were like a bit of a slog. They were hard on the harder difficulty, and they didn't increase the challenge in a meaningful way. It was just, I have to shoot it more. And having infinite turret ammo is really boring. They had some really great ideas for bosses, great ideas for the way the story could play out, and I think they were just not executed well at all. So my enjoyment of Resident Evil 5 just dropped so fast, and I found myself just pushing to get through the game so I could finish it. I played this right after finishing Resident Evil 4, and I just did not have nearly as much fun with it. And it's a shame. The best part about this game is when you finish it. The final fight with Albert Wesker is pretty okay. I think it was a decent idea. I like that Albert Wesker transforms finally. In the earlier sections when you fight him, he's really fast and zippy, and it's really hard to pin him down. You have to do some like hiding and shooting him from behind when he's not aware. You have to free Jill Valentine at one point. You do a duo boss fight with both of them. She's being mind controlled. This is another weird point. She's being mind controlled and has like this weird metal scarab on her chest. You have to like shoot, and then you have to knock her down and then go yank it off. It's a really weird animation too when Chris is trying to take it off of her. It's like weirdly sexual. It's bizarre. I didn't enjoy that aspect at all. And then all the time, Albert Wesker might be getting up and coming to attack you. Sheva's useless as a companion if for suppressing fire to help you with the section. When you finally take the scarab off, Jill's back to normal. I don't understand why they didn't just infect her with the Las Plagas virus like they did with Resident Evil 4 and Leon. Maybe they didn't want to retread the idea, but it was so much more interesting that you were fighting that the entire game. It makes absolutely no sense that everybody in this game, outside of you and Sheva, is infected with the Las Plagas virus, but Jill Valentine is just mind controlled for some reason. I don't understand the rationale. Why wouldn't you give her more power with the virus or take over her entirely? It just is baffling to me. And then once you finally do free her, she goes off and you don't see her very much for the rest of the game. Why don't you have her as a companion after that? I understand Sheva's a cool character and you want to keep her around. I didn't want to get rid of her at all. In the cutscene, she's awesome. I love what they did with her character-wise. But you're looking for Jill this whole time and then she just disappears. She goes MIA. It's baffling. The way they executed this game is just so frustrating, especially as a Resident Evil fan. I've loved so many of the main entries and even some of the spin-off games. But man, this one just fell flat in so many ways. The final fight with Albert Wesker is interesting because Wesker transforms. He turns into a big behemoth. He doesn't do the traditional thing where they become like essentially a mindless giant monster. He still has a relatively humanoid form, and you fight him. It's an interesting fight. You have the infamous Chris punching the boulder thing to get out of the way, which is hilarious. Just as hilarious as you've ever seen if you've seen that memed. It's so funny. And then you shoot a rocket into his face as the volcano's imploding and about to erupt. And it's really cool. The final set piece is so fantastic. And the way they end it is great. I actually really enjoy that aspect of it. But to get there was not enjoyable. Hardly at all. There was very few spots where I actually enjoyed the gameplay enough to keep pushing on. It was mostly me pushing on so I could finally get the lore for this game. I was massively disappointed by Resident Evil 5. So is Resident Evil 5 a good game? It's not a great game, that's for sure. I don't even know if it's a good game. I think from everything that I've said, it really lowers it into just okay. I don't think it really succeeds in a lot of ways. Maybe with a co-op player, this could be more fun, but I can't imagine. There's so much tedium in this game. I can't imagine that being more fun with another player. It might be even less because then you're subjecting them to the tedium at the same time. For me, this is just an okay Resident Evil experience and one that you should absolutely pass. If this ever gets like ported over, I would pass this immediately. If it gets remade, awesome. That they probably could do a lot with this remake and make it way more interesting, especially for single player. I would really like to see that. But man, if you are playing this as a Resident Evil fan, you've never played 5 before, yeah, go out and pick up the triple pack, try it out. I would recommend a co-op player if you can. If not, just get a good game plan going in. If you're not a Resident Evil fan, there is absolutely no reason for you to ever touch this game. I'm going to give Resident Evil 5 a bronze rank. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.